Go ahead, Karen.
So I'm Karen Mahaly and my preferred pronouns are she and her. And we're going to start with the land acknowledgement. So I'm going to note that the land that we occupy right now is the land of the original land of the Haudenosaunee people of the Onondaga Nation, and who are still here. And we're grateful for our connection and for all that we are continuing to learn and to apply to our lives here on this planet. So with that, we're going to start the night off with just a moment of silence and to send our thoughts and prayers and our wishes for peace to the Ukrainian people and to the countryside and to the Russian people also. So we'll just do that for a moment. So let us bring our hearts and minds back together again right now, and let's turn it over to Allison to give an overview of what we're doing tonight.
Great. Thank you, Karen. Welcome, everyone. My name is Allison Mullen Stout, she, her pronouns. We have quite the night ahead of us. We have about an hour's worth of presentations from some amazing local activists and a Ukrainian artist. So we'll hear from Lita Suki, as well as Ali Wayne, Diane Swords, and Karen Mahaly. And then we'll go into some breakout rooms and discuss for about 15 minutes and then come back and share any questions that we may still have. And we always end with any announcements and appreciations for the evening. So we'll cover a wide variety of topics, everything from, some stories from folks on the ground right now, photos of people in Ukraine, to talking about, refugees, talking about race, talking about NATO, the role of NATO, as well as sanctions, nuclear weapons, and the international peace movement. So buckle up. And yeah, we're very grateful for the folks who are joining us to present today. We're going to start with Lita Suki. And Lita has worked with the choir in the past with an extended project that was presented at Art Rage. She's an art photographer and a daughter of Ukrainian refugees. And she grew up in the US, but often draws upon her family background as inspiration for her creative work. So we're very grateful that you can be here with us today, and I'll hand it right over to you.
Thanks very much, Allison. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. And thank you all for being here and for your interest. I really appreciate it. I wanted to start a little bit with the work of another photographer who's a friend of ours, who my partner Mishu helped bring to the United States a year after the Revolution of Dignity in 2014. And so I wanted, basically it answers the question of how did we get here? And so we can, how do I share my screen? Okay, share screen.
You need to be allowed. Yeah.
Can I be allowed to share my screen? Yeah. Oh, okay, right.
You should be able to do it.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, it's shared.
Okay. So I'm starting with this Revolution of Dignity in 2014, and these are all photographs by our close friend Clem DeMitt, who was only 21 years old at the time that she made these. And I'm going to quote a little bit from her writing. Ukrainians, many students and young people protested peacefully on the main square of the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, in favor of joining the European Union. The main reasons behind the protest was need to end the widespread Soviet-style corruption and the desire for basic human dignity. When young protesters were brutally beaten by police, special forces called Berkut, and the pro-Russian president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, reacted as though the Berkut actions were correct. And this was enough for the Ukrainian people to come out and protest. What happened was that the young people were beaten brutally. And this was done at the main square in Kyiv. But what they didn't realize was that this was being beamed, this was being broadcast live on the television sets of the parents and the grandparents of these students. And so people came out in support of them. And at first, there were even friendly interactions. Here, protesters are handing out sandwiches and talking to the police and urging them to join the people's cause. And you can see that they're standing on frozen water here that came from the water cannons that had been aimed at the protesters earlier. So that water had frozen, and now the police was standing on that. However, the protest did lead to a revolution. And many people joined, and the revolution lasted for a few months. People occupied the square and were living there. The protesters were living there. And every evening around 6 p.m., the priests would come out between the protesters and the police, the special forces, and they would say a prayer. And both the special forces as well as the protesters would participate in this prayer. But people had to be very watchful because very soon after the prayer, the fighting would resume. And I want to say that the people came from all different walks of life. They came from work. This was in the middle of Kyiv. People that had had enough were sitting in their office, and they came down and they made Molotov cocktails and they joined the protesters. People came from villages very far away, very remote villages. People came to support with helping to cook meals, helping to dress people that were there, helping them find places to sleep. They all joined together in any way that they could. Created If you look into the far background here, you can see that there's shields. These are the police with their shields here. And the only thing that's protecting the protesters is the inability to see them. That's caused by very often putting anything that would burn, including tires there. And the sign ironically says, the year 2014 will be a happy one. So this is when snipers started shooting at the protesters, and the protesters were killed. On this day, many of the protesters were shot dead by snipers that were sent there by the Soviet forces. And the reason why the people were fighting, they're building the barricades here, but the reason why they're fighting is because they wanted to go into the direction of the EU, and they wanted to have freedom and democracy. And the government that was in power didn't want to allow that to happen. And that government was supported by the Soviet regime, by the Putin regime, which was the regime that has a lot of Soviet artifacts still. This is a protester that is climbed up on the roof and he's looking for snipers. He's looking for snipers there. The snipers killed around 90 people on that day. And this is the roof of the October Palace. People weren't able to sleep during this whole period of time. They could only take quick naps and they depended on friends to keep watch because the fighting could resume at any time. And here a couple is huddled on the concert hall floor of the October Palace. People that came from out of town to help slept like this. This is the last day of the protest. People were carrying in an injured man to the medics. There were always nurses and doctors. And Clem says that she never thought that she could still hear, but she still hears the screams in many different languages, voices, and accents. We need a medic. We need a medic. And I'd like to mention that the protesters were both Russian language and Ukrainian language, and many foreigners came to lend a hand as well. They wore gas masks to protect themselves from the tear gas and the smoke. Although sometimes this was helpful, mostly the masks were just very cold and useless in weather that often reached as low as negative 20 degrees centigrade. Here, people are warming their hands in barrels of fire, and they're trying to maintain the protest movement. And they're burning things, and it's terrible, for everybody's health, but it's the only way that they can protect themselves. So we have a wall of smoke and fire protecting the protesters, which are here in the square here. And this is the line of police. And Clem DeMitt, our photographer, has somehow managed to climb roofs and get behind the lines of the armed forces of the government. She's just amazing that she's able to do this. But she also gets really close where she can see the eyes of the police. And here we have boys that are maybe 20 years old, and they really don't know why they were sent here. So the protesters talk to them and try to convince them to join their side. Many people are injured. Lots of people need help, and there's lots of volunteer medics running through the chaos, and they're appearing to help people. But people walked and crawled and came to where the doctors were, and they pulled bleeding people from the hands of the police. And there was a lot of downtime, a lot of waiting, sitting around, and people took the opportunity to play chess or sometimes play ping pong. There was one man that played the piano right on the square, and people joined him to sing. This is the trade unions building in the corner of Independence Square, and you can see that it's burned. Many people used to sleep here. On February 18th, 2014, it suddenly caught fire during a police attack, and not everybody was evacuated. Later, bodies with bullet wounds were found on the upper floor. The police escaped from the building by running onto another roof. And this is a man that's been injured in a grenade attack and is being tended to by a volunteer medic. And the internal troops, this is they're using live ammunition. So many people were cruelly caught by the police. And a young boy had a hand severed by an explosion of a police grenade. There's a lot of blood and people's lost items while they're running away from shots and from explosions. So this is the work of a 20-year-old young woman photographer that was a witness to this and that lived through this all. I saw her work just in passing and thought that we needed to show it to more people. So Mishu and I were able to get her to come here a year after. I wanted to change gears a little bit and show some quieter work. This is my own work. This is an old photograph. I'm the daughter of Ukrainian refugees. I think that you all know, but I was explaining to my OCC students today that refugees don't come looking for a better life. They are forced to flee their home and everything that they have and just leave with the clothes on their back and maybe a few precious items that they're able to carry. But this was the experience of my parents, and it was just by coincidence that they were able to come to the United States. This is me in Rochester, New York, where I grew up, and I'm dressed in a Ukrainian outfit. When I was little and people asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up, I told them I wanted to be a hutsulka, which is the female form of a hutsol, and you'll see hutsols in a little bit. I was drawn to photographing um, people that were also refugees, Ukrainian Americans. So I began by photographing a Ukrainian American refugee that reminded me a lot of my parents. And she kind of kept herself alive through working in her garden and working the earth. I think there's a really strong connection between a lot of the people in Ukraine and the earth. And this kept her grounded. And this was Prisha Witvitsky, and she lived very, very frugally on the very bare basics. But she was a big donor to various different causes, and in particular tried to help people in Ukraine. This is a picture of my grandfather, whom I never met. He's with a fish, and this is this is the place where my father learned how to trout fish, and he would tell me many stories that turned into myths in my mind. And in 1992, when the Soviet Union collapsed, he was able to travel back for the first time. And I came with him, and we met with this man named Dzido Vasil, who lived in a small village in the Carpathian Mountains, not far from the foothills where my father had grown up, and in the same area where he spent his summers as a young child. So Dzido Vasil invited me to come back and to photograph. And I did. I came back and I stayed for a year. And I lived in the village with the people, and I photographed them using the most unusual contraption perhaps for this terrain, this very large camera that's very bulky and heavy. And it creates portraits like the ones that I made of the community choir. So maybe you remember that experience. But using this camera forced me to slow down and really get to know the people and talk to them. It's not like I could take a candid picture. And also the detail that the camera captured really described a lot of what it was like to be there, the little details. This was a table that was set for really important visitors, and it had the best things that this family had to offer. So there was some schnapps from Germany and some soda. So people lived very, very frugally, very, very poor. There wasn't a lot to eat, and there wasn't a lot of different options commercially and things like that. This is at a funeral. But this is Christmas Eve dinner. And here people shared the bowls, but everybody got their own spoon. And this is a traditional Christmas Eve dinner with kucha and different 12 meals that are all, don't include any meat, and bread that's shared. So the family gathered around this table for Christmas Eve, and it's the most special night and the most special ritual of the year. During the Soviet era, people weren't allowed to practice these religious rituals. They were limited in what they could do and going to church and so forth and in their beliefs. And when the Soviet era ended, they were able in this particular village to renew those beliefs. This is Dzido Vasil, who was my host while I was there. And this is his daughter here, right here. And she's walking into the house here. And these are some of her grandchildren. And this young man here was my helper. And I want to show you some photographs of him soon. This was the part of the house. There was a little room here that I stayed in for the year that I lived in Krivoryunya. And again, the daughter of the man with the binoculars here, one of my closest friends there. Different rituals, these are from Easter. This is the tomb of a Soviet apparatchik. He was active in the village and implementing some of the Soviet rules and so forth. And a view of a graveyard of ordinary people there. I stayed there over a period of time and I came back so I could see change happen over time. So this is the same man, and this is his eldest son. And here he is about 15 years later with his youngest son. And so you see the two of them together here. This is another family, and I came back about 10 years later, and here they are. Some of them had left, some of them had lived through pretty extreme hardships. A young woman that I photographed, she's 7 here, going on, I don't know, 20, and here she is as an adult and now she has her own family. And this woman dressed in she had been at forced labor camp in Siberia, and she she was one of the few people from Siberia that actually was able to make it back home. And she recreated the prisoner's garb that she wore while she was in forced labor camp. Actually, these hands were used to sort through uranium ore. So the best years of her life, she lost in those labor camps. And then I photographed her later. So you can see the change over time here. And finally, I'm going to end with this set of images. This is my friend Hanusha. She's the granddaughter of Dzido Vasil with the binoculars, and her daughter Marichka, the great-granddaughter of Dzido Vasil with the binoculars. Marichka sent me the Eurovision music just the day before yesterday. So here she is. Now she's a volunteer. She's volunteering in the, I think it's, what is it called? The transitional army, or the transitional self-defense. And people have learned that they really can't rely on the government much for help. They have to support themselves. And there's a new reinvigoration of volunteerism and of helping one another through community organizations. So she's very active in that now. And I would like to go now to the little boy that I mentioned to you before, that had worked helping me sometimes carry my camera gear. His name is Andriy, and he's about 20 years old now. He was able to go to a leadership school after he graduated high school, and then he went on to study philosophy at the university in Lviv. And I texted him the day before yesterday and asked him to tell me what he was doing. And he said to me that he wasn't doing anything very interesting, but that he and his girlfriend and his community would be going to the basement of the school, and they would be going there to weave nets. Now, these are camouflage nets for the soldiers. So they're doing this to help the soldiers and to help protect themselves. So this is Enrico, his mom, and his girlfriend. And he also told me that many of his friends have volunteered um, in these community self-defense groups, and they are also weaving nets or making Molotov cocktails, and they're doing anything they can to help. They're also helping with medics and medicines and anything that they can do to help. My friends in the cities of Lviv and Kiev and others help as volunteers in shelters. We also weave nets or prepare Molotov cocktails. We are waiting for when we are needed. As for me, I prepare firewood and other resources. This is necessary if I am taken to fight. So, how do I unshare the screen? Stop share. So this is some personal stories of friends of ours that I wanted to share with you. Yeah, do you want to add anything, Mishu?
Well, a couple of days ago, we called people in the village, called people in a city. And what do you say in a situation like this? We're thinking of you. We wish you strength. Simply, you don't know exactly what to say. Then you start to think, how can you help? How can you make a difference in this very desperate and very brutal fight when Ukrainians are fighting for their country, where Ukrainians are defending their freedom, when, yeah, it's hard to describe of what you say. So you're trying to do things like talking with other people, explaining about a country that these days seems to set an example of what it is to fight for own freedom, for own survival, and for its place in a democratic world. Mm. And maybe I should mention one more personal thing, or kind of one more thing. Some of you may know Lida's mom, who was escaping, who, as Lida started basically to save her lives, to save, the lives of the family. And she would tell me, Misha, you don't know what it is to have Stalinist or Putinist Russia as your neighbor. And one of the things that I would like to share, I've been glued, to the internet. I've been glued, to news. And what you see is an incredible destruction, loss of lives. Many young people people of all ages from Ukraine, but also many Russian soldiers that they don't even know where they are. They don't even know why are they, that they came on tanks expected that they will be welcomed with the flowers. And they are, if they survive, they call their parents and say, I don't know what I'm doing here. And it's very difficult to not to despair, but see how the Ukrainians, instead of despairing in very disciplined manner, try to defend their own land. I don't want to use the word inspiring. I just don't know what to say, but I pray for all people in this vicious conflict. I pray so that the occupying army moves out. And I also hope that the vicious mind of the authoritarian and Kremlin will come to end. So that's what I have to say. I don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much for sharing. Lita, I'm still having trouble playing that song, I think because of the format it's
Okay.
in. Does it work for you? Because I think you could share your sound.
Okay, I can try and do that.
Okay. And share the background of it. And in the meantime, you've got some reactions in the chat. So I'll just share those. Jonathan and Sarah say, thank you, very poignant. Annagret says, thank you, Lita, what a gift you gave us. Mara says, very heartwarming, what a horrible tragedy. My relatives are also from Eastern Ukraine. And Diane Sword says, thank you, Lisa and Michaud, so much.
Okay, I'm gonna skip the song. I think it's
Okay.
I think the silence may be more.
silence might be more appropriate right now. But
so we are very thankful for the opportunity to share and to ask for your thoughts, for your prayers, for your support of people of Ukraine in their fight
in their
for
time of
survival.
need. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Diane Agno says, love to you both. Barbara says, thank you, Lita and Michaud. Carolyn and Michael say, thank you for sharing in this difficult time. I also have ancestors in the Carpathian Mountains. Jess Ryan says, we so appreciate you sharing with us. We will send thoughts, prayers, and love. And Colleen says, so grateful for your witness. My heart goes out to all the people of Ukraine. May soldiers all lay down their arms. And I would love now to introduce our friend Ali Wayne. Ali is a member of the Peace Council Steering Committee and the UndocuBlack Network, and he will share a note on race. And thank you so much for being here, Ali. I'll hand it over to you now.
Yeah, this feels very heavy, and I appreciate the silence, actually. Thank you so much, Lita and Misha, for what you shared in terms of the political struggle in Ukraine, people's desire to simply be free. You know, I think those pictures of daily life, I mean, they depict what we all want to have, I think, in our lives, as a safe space, a little bit of a refuge. I did want to talk about a particular situation that has not been talked about much in the news around this, but it is certainly in the service of figuring out how we can make sure that all of the people affected by this war are safe and secure and loved. I did want to share that. So I am a member of the UndocuBlack Network. We are a group of people who work with mostly undocumented and Black folks in the United States. And so we think very deeply about issues of immigration and refugees and things like that. And on a personal level, this, I think, hits me so hard because I remember the reason that I eventually became an anti-war activist is that I spent a little bit of time when I was younger in Rwanda before the genocide exploded, but in the theater of war for about a week or so. And that really sort of traumatized me. And watching pictures of people sort of fleeing for their lives is, I know what that feels like. I know the terror of that. And my thoughts and love are with the people in Ukraine right now. I did want to touch on a topic that has been underreported and that my organization has been trying to get some media people's attention to on this issue, which is that as obviously people are fleeing Ukraine right now, and I believe last I checked, I mean, we're looking at a mass exodus. The most conservative numbers that I've seen are about 500,000 people who are fleeing Ukraine right now. And that is creating a tremendous amount of terror, confusion, and unfortunately within that terror and confusion, there have been lots of reports. Well, there have been reports, but they have been very underreported of unfortunately African migrants and Asian migrants who have had a much harder time getting out of the country for many reasons. The obvious one is that their embassies are not up to being able to supporting them. But the other thing that needs to be named, unfortunately, is that as many of them are trying to leave, many of them are students studying in medical school or engineering school who went to Ukraine. As they're trying to leave and try to go to places like Poland, for example, they have been told quite literally, they've used the phrase like that they need to get in the back of the line, and some of them have been kicked out of these buses. The people who have been prioritized in terms of being evacuated are white Ukrainian citizens. And I don't share this, especially in this atmosphere, to add to any kind of anti-Ukrainian sentiment, but just to sort of put a pin on something which I think is going to be really important, which is actually what my organization is trying to do, which is that we are heartened to see that because of, the awful images that we're seeing out of Ukraine, the world has gathered around, making sure that Ukrainian refugees have places to land. In my opinion, not even quickly enough. One of the things that my organization is trying to do right now is pressure the Biden administration to designate Ukrainian Americans for something called temporary protective status, so that they could be able to remain in this country, even if they don't have legal status, and that they could reunite with their family members. But what a lot of us are seeing is that what we are trying to call for is we would like to see the United States and certainly other European countries really take up the mantle of welcoming as many refugees as possible and treat all refugees in the same way, make sure that as we welcome all of these Ukrainian refugees, and I certainly unfortunately anticipate a crisis, that we make sure that refugees of all background, races, gender, identity, all of those things are taken care of, and that we have a greater sense of solidarity to make sure that folks are treated well. I'm just going to be honest, it has been really hard to see images that have been leaked out in the media of Black migrants sort of freezing in the snow and being shut out. This afternoon, I was on an Instagram Live with someone who's actually British-born Black activist out of who's been trying to get some resources to the people, to these Black migrants in Ukraine. And she's been sharing with me some horror stories about the unequal treatment of these Black and Asian migrants trying to flee. And I don't need to get into any details, but it's just another layer to this atrocity, which is as everyone is trying to find a refuge of safety. Unfortunately, what we often see is that, refugees of color tend to be the ones who are at the bottom of the barrel in terms of getting help. And what my organization and a lot of Black, I think, migrant organizations are trying to say right now and to share right now is that, yes, absolutely, we need to focus and make sure that our Ukrainian kinfolk are taken care of. But let's not put to the side the issue that all refugees should be welcomed where they need to be. It varies by country. Poland has actually been the worst of the countries when it comes to being unwilling to take in Black and Asian refugees. But we want to make sure that everyone is safe. So I guess I will just, end my remarks here, but just want to really emphasize that the only reason that I'm sharing this is that I think that this is a potential moment of true global solidarity. And that just as my heart weeps for what's happening to my Ukrainian kinfolk, I want to make sure that everyone in that country is safe, including the people of color trying to flee this incredible violence. But just wanted to thank you for this opportunity to share, and I want to once again just share my sympathy, love, understanding to the people in Ukraine, and whatever we can do locally, nationally, to pressure our politicians to make sure that this atrocity ends and that whoever needs to find a home leaving this war theater is going to be able to find a home. So thanks for giving me this time to share about this issue.
Thank you so much, Ali. I appreciate you sharing on that really important aspect of what's going on. So thank you for being here. I am going to now hand it over to Diane Swords, who is an alto in the choir, a member of Syracuse Peace Council's Nuclear Free World Committee. And she'll share on the role of the US, NATO, nuclear weapons, and sanctions in the Ukraine conflict. She's going to do that in 10 minutes. So thank you for all your work so far, Diane, and yeah, hand it to you.
Yeah, yeah, that is kind of a mouthful. First of all, thank you so much, Lida and Mishu. And thank you, Ali. Just so many angles on this, and it's so huge, and it's hard to figure out, how to zoom into what can we do. And one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is we're here in the US. This is where we can make some difference by trying to change US policy. And of course, US policy has a lot of influence around the world. So that's really, it's all linked together. But that is where I'm going to focus. And I also want to be very clear that what I'm doing is more raising questions that need to be raised than bringing answers. Although I think I've gathered some things from peace organizations around the world that are very important. But I first have been really struck by kind of the media, I don't know, cowboy mentality with the black hats and the white hats, and the Russians are terrible and despicable and the Americans are the good guys. And that's way oversimplified, and it in no way diminishes our our horror at what Russia is doing to say that the US and NATO are not helping the situation, and indeed have been for a number of years now pouring gasoline on the fire, so to speak. I know that a lot of people that I knew during the Cold War who would have, not been willing to talk about this in a dichotomy like that, an either or way. Somehow I'm seeing people follow media, which is kind of giving us a very elite-oriented message. And I think that needs to be questioned. And my understanding is that in order to be able to stay in good relation with leaders, media reporters and so forth need to report what the government wants them to report. And not that it's controlled, but it's very difficult to go very far from that. And so what we end up with is something only slightly different than government talking points. And that's where we need to be raising questions and not just going with the mainstream story. So one of the big questions I want to ask is NATO a defensive alliance? Because we are told that people want to join NATO because it gives them security and that it's for their defense. But first of all, NATO is not always defensive. It has supported US military aggression in a number of conflicts: Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan. So NATO is not an innocent protector of security. Also, the aggressive stance on China is bringing tension that is compounding all the tensions that we're facing. And second, protection by NATO is a questionable idea anyway. NATO has always been based on the idea of deterrence. And deterrence is a concept that means that the threat of total annihilation will prevent countries from using nuclear weapons. And in the 80s, that was called mutually assured destruction, MAD, and it is a MAD concept. But this balance of terror depends on certain things that aren't always to be counted on. It depends on rationality. It depends on no mistakes being made. And so the more the tensions mount, the more dangerous things become and the more rationality and is diminished and mistakes become more likely. The one-upmanship that happened during the Cold War by the US and then the then Soviet Union created the danger of escalating tensions to the point where accidents or irrationality became more likely. And this is recurring now. So while nations may hope to be protected by NATO, the protection is illusory. Common security can be attained only through diplomatic relationships. And we, with Syracuse Peace Council, that is, and many other organizations that are involved with trying to make peace in the situation, feel strongly that NATO is part of the problem and diplomacy is part of the solution. One other point I want to quickly make is that Congress is considering a massive defense package of $500 million of new weapons to the Ukraine. It's a huge windfall to weapons makers. It does not protect the Ukraine, and it's a theft from all the things that we need here at home and the things that we need to support diplomacy around the Ukraine. And so we need to be taking a stance against that. And another part of that bill is sanctions on Russia. And some people say that sanctions are an alternative to the violence of war, of military action. But sanctions often hurt the common people far more than the perpetrators of war. People talk of targeted sanctions. And so a question I want to raise is, can we target the perpetrators without harming the people who are, in many cases, protesting the war? And I think when you look at the data, sanctions have not ever really stopped a war. So I think we need to really examine that carefully. In a sense, they're a form of violence. They're just a slower form than the war making. So in summary, I think some of the things that are important to think about are saying no to NATO expansion, no to military aid to the Ukraine, and yes to humanitarian aid, no to sanctions that harm ordinary Russians, yes to diplomacy. And one thing that I've been working on a great deal with the Peace Council is a campaign called Back from the Brink, which would reduce the risk of nuclear war. We advocate for a commitment to no first use of nuclear weapons, a freeze on all new nuclear weapons, and many people are not aware that the US is about to start a whole new round of nuclear weapons and delivery system programs and whole infrastructure, whole nuclear infrastructure that only cycles this escalation of tensions, and instead join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So I just want to conclude by saying, while this sounds distant and far away, and may sound like it's not as directly focused on the people of Ukraine who need our support right now, I think that we need to be doing these things simultaneously, or we continue to perpetuate the situations that create these wars. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope that we can ask these questions together and explore them further.
Thanks, Diane. And thanks for sharing that perspective. It's really important to hear about that. I'm now going to hand it back to Karen Mahaly, choir director. Although first I'll actually share a couple of the responses. We had some responses for Ali. Thank you, Ali. This is Annegret, for highlighting this issue. It has certainly come up before with other migrants arriving at the borders of Hungary, Poland, etc. Remember the recent crisis at the border between Belarus and Poland. It's hard to make these things jive. Jonathan and Sarah say, thanks for the invitation to deep intersectionality and critical, analytical and caring angle. Carolyn and Michael say, my heart goes out to you, Ali, your comrades and people of all ethnicities in Ukraine. And we had a few comments on Facebook as well. So going back to Lita, Nancy Gwynn says, great gratitude, Lita. Your photos have brought these people of Ukraine to us. And Nancy also says, thank you, Ali, for sharing, for challenging us. So I'm sure we'll have some more for you, Diane, reactions to things you're saying. Right after Karen speaks, we're going to transition into breakout rooms. So I've shared the Zoom link for those of us who are on Facebook. So you're welcome to join us on Zoom if you do want to join a breakout room to chat with a couple of other people and share your reflections. And if not, that's okay. So I will now hand it over to Karen Mahali, Director of the Choir, who will talk about the International Peace Movement.
Not that I know a lot about this, so I'm just going to do a little brief comment. I was at an international Zoom meeting on February 26th that Code Pink organized. It was a rally, and there were 2,000, well, there were thousands of people there from all around the world, and it was very important to me to again know, and Ali said this too, about the global movement of peacemaking that we are a part of, and that as a people to people demonstration of our concern for the people of the world, and not necessarily to the governments of the world if they're not making the decisions that create real peace. So at that meeting, there were a lot of people talking about different things, but we decided to do this global action on this week, March 6th, this Sunday, or around this Sunday, all around the world, to call everyone to oppose the war, to take to the streets, or to do an action that would say stop the war in Ukraine, cease the fighting, Russian troops out, and no to NATO expansion. So there is something that's going to be happening at Syracuse. We'll talk about that later. They did talk about them. There were some things that I just wanted to mention. One was the increased, we talked about that, aid to military budgets all over the world now. And that this kind of thing, like in England, this one was talking about it, and Biden, just as we just said, means that some of the crucial issues like climate change and voting rights and human issues, money will be taken away from that, again, putting it towards the war machine, which we know does not work, and the refugee problem. So this international peace movement, on the Code Pink website, you can go if you want to see kind of what's happening. There's a lot of things happening this Sunday in the United States, Tokyo, Japan, Wales, Scotland, all over the in England, Germany, Hawaii, even the Vatican. St. Francis put out a big statement today, and Russia. And so in the spirit of understanding and kind of thinking about us all as people, I was interested to look at, or to note, that there's been quite a lot of opposition in Russia from leaders, military, and soldiers refusing to fight, punching holes in their gas tanks, and doing other kinds of things to kind of, as Misha was saying, not even understanding why they were there. And so I'm going to end with reading a little bit of a letter that Russian peace scientists wrote. Hold on a minute. Because I remember when the United States was invading Iraq, an illegal invasion and war, where all around the world, no country was actually supporting us. You know, it was millions of people died. And we in the United States, the peace movement, had to keep at that, even though it was so hard, because we knew that in the belly of the beast was very important that the opposition come from inside, as well as the country that we were invading, that those were the really important things. So for these Russian scientists, we Russian scientists and scientific journalists declare a strong protest against the hostile launching by the armed forces of our country on the territory of Ukraine. This fatal step leads to huge human loss and undermines foundations of the established system of international security. The responsibility for unleashing a new war in Europe lies entirely on Russia. There is no rationale for this war. Ukraine has been and remains a country close to us. Many of us have relatives, friends, and scientific colleagues living there. Our fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers fought together against Nazism. It's a cynical betrayal of that memory. We respect Ukraine's statehood, which rests on really working democratic institutions. We treat the European choice of our neighbors with understanding, We are convinced that all problems in relations between our countries can be resolved peacefully. We demand an immediate halt to all military operations against Ukraine. We demand respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Ukraine state. We demand peace for our country. Let's do science, not war. So as we move forward with our peace work, let us connect globally, and let us put all of those issues together to make a world that is peaceful and just. Done.
Thanks, Karen. That was good to hear. And I shared the links in the chat as well if folks want to read more. And we can talk a little bit more about it later, but the Syracuse Peace Council will be participating in Global Day of Action on Sunday, downtown-ish, midday-ish. There'll be more details coming in the next couple of days. So a quick organizing happening here, but very important to us to participate and be part of the international peace movement. So great. So now Steve has us organized. We're going to break into small groups to talk a little bit about our reactions to all of this. I imagine people have some thoughts and feelings that you'd like to share. So what I'd like for us to do is there's two quite open questions that we have. So the first question is, what thoughts or feelings arose for you? And the second question is, what questions do you still have? So afterwards we'll come back and there'll be another opportunity to have a little more of a conversation with the large group. So process wise, there will be a facilitator in each group. And I want to make sure that each person gets a turn to share. If you want to skip, that's no problem. But everyone should have a chance to share, which means, keep your comments as brief as you can so everyone gets a chance to at least share once. So yeah, we will we'll break up into groups. We'll be there for 15 minutes and then Steve will wish us back. So yeah, look forward to chatting with some of you.
Did you want to mention about the Facebook feed shutting down?
Yes, so we will end the Facebook stream now. If anyone is on who wants to join us on Zoom, the link is there and you're more than welcome to join us. We hope you will. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so the total time will be 15 minutes. There's groups of people seem to be leaving, 3 to 4, 2 to 4. So I can balance that out. After 14 minutes, you'll have a minute left. So you don't have to come rushing back here. It'll bring you back automatically. Okay.
Welcome back. I hope we had some fruitful conversations. And I'd like to open up the floor. You're welcome to raise your real or digital hand and ask to say a question, and I can have you unmuted, or put your question in the chat and I'll read it out, or a comment or anything that came out of your conversations. I'm looking for hands. Jonathan, Sarah say, thank you. I'll see you on Sunday. Mara.
I think our group was pretty sunk and depressed. And I think one of the things we did talk about that I think a bunch of us are struggling with, and Ali, you raised it certainly, which is, why are we caring more about Ukraine and people being murdered there? Is it because they look like us, or like many of us, or et cetera? And do we not care as much when it's a country in Africa or somewhere else? And then, of course, that grips at me too, because I know it's true. It's like we feel more attachment to certain places or certain narratives or certain people. I don't have relatives, from Africa. I have relatives from Ukraine. So, but that doesn't mean that the people being killed in those other countries aren't also children and mothers and families and civilians, et cetera. So how do we both care about this particular crisis, which is horrible, but on the other hand, not get lost in the fact that this is not the only one? But we don't also want to get immobilized like, oh, well, there's so many, you can't do anything about any of them. So you don't want to get so generalized like, yeah, people are being killed all over the world. What can you do? Versus we only care about this one. So somehow I and some of the rest of us were struggling in that tension.
Yeah, we asked that question too, Mara. Karen Remley is interested in hearing why Putin is so fixated by controlling the Ukraine. Does anyone have a response to that? Go for it, Colleen.
I'm not an expert on anything Ukraine at all, but I think that part of it is that, and maybe Lida would be the person to speak to that more. But I read this article that just kind of blew my mind, and it was that someone like Putin is very similar to the Orange Man that we have, and but he thinks that he has like a divine right, like his power comes from God, like God given, as if he were like a monarchical figure. And I think that the histories of that region are really intertwined, and so that's that's a reason why just he thinks that he can take it. Yeah, and connected to that is that I just can't I can't wrap my head around why a few people in the world can control everyone's lives. This is something horribly, terribly wrong. And I think what Karen was saying before, but we just have to, come together somehow, because it's just can't stay. The earth will not abide by it.
Yeah. Annika? Oh, go ahead, Michelle.
I would be interested that the person that asked why is Putin so fixated about Ukraine, what she or he thinks why.
Did you want to comment on that, Karen? You're muted.
I'm trying to unmute myself. It wasn't working. Okay. I think it's not only about his ginormous ego, which obviously is there, but it seems that there must be some sort of resources available in Ukraine. If he kills Ukraine, he'll get something out of it. He can't just be like, oh, I just need that because it's mine. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I'll be glad to offer my perspective on this. What Ukraine has been trying to achieve, why is it trying to join the European Union, is exactly for the values of democracy. Just if you think of how long Putin is in a power, 20-something year, and how many presidents has changed in a free and fair elections in Ukraine. So you see a real aspirations for a democracy. The danger of the situation in Ukraine is the world is tipping towards autocratic figures. That is why the former President Trump is speaking about Putin with the great admiration. So I feel, Maura, what you said, and why do we care about this? Is it because it's Ukraine? I do have a feeling that what's being decided is whether not just the Ukraine, but the world will tip towards autocracy, or whether the world will go towards the democracy. And the resolve of Ukrainians who've been, this is totally imperfect attempt. I've been looking a lot of videos. This was from 2 years ago with the soldier in a trench. Why are you fighting? We are trying to go away from the Russian Empire. If you think about the Tsar, who speaks in his presentations, there's no such a thing as Ukraine. They are just the Russians. It's a 40 million nation, that tries to go in a different direction, in a direction of democracy and freedom. And the danger of that for Putin is that the people ask, how come that this portion of the former Russian Empire is able to go towards the freedom? Just think about the current president that is there, yes? Zelensky, when he is offered, to go to the safe haven, yes, to own personal safety, and he says, I don't need a ride, I need an ammunition, I need a help, So I think that the danger of Putin, and Putin already lost this war. He may subjugate it, he may kill so many people, but the desire for an open democratic society has been in Ukraine for a long, long time. That's the danger. That's the danger for Putin.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. I know Anna Grat had her hand raised, and then I do want to give folks a chance to sign off if you do need to leave, but we can continue the conversation for those who want to stay. Go ahead, Anna Grat.
Hey.
I was actually trying to ask Lida and Mishu a question that you started talking about, Mishu, which is, Putin talked as his excuse. He talked about the history of the Ukrainian map and statehood and all of that kind of stuff, and I'm interested in learning a little bit more about that, but I don't know if we have time for that. That's why I was like waving and wanting to jump in before you talked for a long time.
The best resource would be Googling Timothy Snyder, who writes and talks about the very complex history of this nation from the perspective of the historian. Why don't you put in a chat the name, Timothy Snyder. Timothy Snyder is also the author of the text on tyranny. That is the very small, pocket book, that I'm giving the high school kids that, graduate, to read, and I ask my students, to read, So that's the best source, of the kind of understanding, of the situation, and he is able to talk about the most complex and most painful things, that are there in a history of that world.
Thank you for that. And a lot of people have been sharing some great articles and links in the chat. So I'll send those around. Did you want to say something, Karen? You're muted. Okay.
I would like to just say that it would be worthwhile also looking at, there's an article that I read called How the Demise of an Arms Control Treaty Foreshadowed Russia's Aggression Against Ukraine. And it's a very interesting article on the treaties that were put in place and how they've been broken, and how that affects Putin's thinking that about safety and stuff like that. So in the honoring that this is a complex question, I would also like to look at what's the backstory around some of this, the nuclear disarmament treaties, and how that's, who's been on them, who hasn't, who's agreed and not agreed, guess who, and how does that fit into this conflict?
Well, in our small group, Karen, I mentioned something that would be actually very worth, for anybody trying to check. There is something called a Budapest Memorandum. Budapest Memorandum basically is the document. It's not a treaty, it's a memorandum where Ukraine, that has been the second largest place,
Yes.
nice text, with the Ukraine, with the nuclear arms, gave up its arms, destroyed its arsenal, in exchange for the guarantee from Russia, from the America, and from UK for its integrity and safety. So this is important to realize, is that the one of the guarantors was Putin, was the Russia, and so that's the kind of a terribly painful irony, of the given situation. And from my simple perspective, is that what I was also sharing is that your reading of the voice of would be a big danger, is to say that it's Russia. No, it's an autocratic, it's an autocratic regime of Vladimir Putin and many people who benefit from it, that's, who is the aggressor, and for whom the idea of the democracy and freedom is the most danger, just a desire for power. The problem is we have seen the similar kind of ambitions, here in this country as well, very recently. That's, that's something that nobody could imagine, so. I'm sorry, we have our Ukrainian friend here. Oksana, come and say hello.
Hello.
So we will be trying to prepare the presentation for our students tomorrow. But we really appreciate the opportunity, to talk and to hear, and we hope that this nightmare, that from this darkness, some light will appear. Actually, it was Lida's mom who would say, there are storms, but after storm, the sun will rise. So thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Misho and Lida, thank you. Can you stay on for another few minutes while we appreciate you? You're welcome to leave, but we do typically end with appreciations, and I'm sure people have some things to say. Or you can just know that we are very grateful that you were here and sharing.
We are grateful for opportunity, but we are kind of a fully, yes. Yeah. Thank you very, very much.
Yes. Thank you for being here.
Do побачення.
Say it again.
До побачення.
Bachina.
Great. Well, let's let's do our wrap up with announcements and appreciations. And then if folks want to continue more of a conversation till about 9, we can do that.
I do have a couple of announcements. You did mention, Allison, the march on Sunday. We don't have the detail yet, but we'll make sure and send it out as soon as the detail is available. It's part of the Global March for Peace around the Ukraine issue, and it will probably take place around downtown around midday on Sunday. So keep that in mind. Second thing is that University United Methodist Church is having a prayer vigil on Friday evening at 6 o'clock. And everyone is invited. It's very low key. Pastor Alicia Wood has asked us to announce it and encourage people to come. And, there'll be silent prayer. There'll be opportunity to say something, and it's fairly brief. And if you, University Church is 1085 East Genesee Street. Colleen says, Colleen, let's talk. I think this group could use some of those stories.
Mhm.
It's pretty disturbing what's going on, but we need the hope.
Mhm. Wendy?
There's also a regular demonstration on Fridays at 4 o'clock at the corner of Erie Boulevard and East Genesee Street. So people are showing up there with signs, diplomacy, not war, and other similar messages. And also Monday at 11 is the last coffee hour of this season. So there'll be a link that will come out. It's the same link that we use on Wednesday nights if you can't find it. So that's been fun for anybody who wants to jump in. Thanks.
Thanks, Wendy.
Could I just say that in our group, we kind of all acknowledge that the antidote to despair or being stuck is really action, doing something, active hope. And I feel like this week that happened to me. I happened to go to the Code Pink rally, and then I went to the Peace Council meeting, and then I was with all these people who were doing things, and then Diana and Allison and I decided to do this, and all of that felt like I could deeply feel this grief, and I can cry about it and about humans and about all the wars, but also some sense of being together and acting. And that's what I would suggest that we do as humans to do this work.
Annegret?
Okay, I'm unmuted. Good. I just want to thank everybody who organized this and put all the work into it, Karen and Allison and Diane, and well, the people who are not here anymore, Ali and Lida and Mishu, and whoever else, I don't know, but thank you so much. That was very, very necessary for us, I think. Looks like Stephen has his hand up.
Stephen.
I found a place in Syracuse that I think is very, it's a good place to know. It's the woman's name is Irina, Irina, and she is the manager of the Ukraine Federal Credit Union, and they are collecting money, clothing, medical supplies that are all going to be shipped out this week. And if you just contact the Ukraine Federal Credit Union and ask for Irina, I think you'll get someplace that's good.
Great, thank you. Carolyn and Michael?
Yeah, Annegret, you kind of took the words out of my mouth, but it's worth repeating that I just so appreciate people pulling this together. I know my usual pattern would be to be glued to some news organization on TV and just be spinning my wheels and getting more and more anxious. This was productive tonight and a positive place to put the energy. And I really appreciate all, and those who I shared pretty bluntly, and those who handled my sharing. I appreciate you.
Oh, Diane.
I just wanted to point out a quote from Howard Zinn. I think it speaks to what Karen was saying, and it speaks to so many people's despair right now, which is very, very real. But the point being that there's both the evil and the good, and if we only focus on the bad things, we just become immobilized, and we have to have hope in order to act. I put the quote in the chat, and I'd be glad to send it around, but it just really keeps me going a lot of the time. So thought it might be useful.
Thanks, Diane. Good night, Joanne. Any other? Colleen, go ahead. You're muted.
Still muted.
But it's such a pain in the ass. You should just unmute everybody at the end. Diane, you reminded me of Jolie Rickman's her famous quote. When she was really sick and she was dying of cancer, and she said, "Carl, I'm the happiest activist alive." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because I'm alive." And I just that says it all, it really does. So,
And I've heard you quote that before
many times, yes. And and I think of the Onondaga, the Haudenosaunee, and they're all grateful for everything, grateful. I mean, every day. And I did just want to say that there are just a couple of things coming up. There's that I'll share with Steve to share with you. Because Bev Grant, songs we've sung, she's turning the big 80, so we're having a badass Bev birthday bash online on March 20th. And then there's going to be a women's labor concert online too on the 26th. So those should be really wonderful. And I'll share those links with you. But I really, really appreciate tonight. And, it was just a perfect combination of speakers, really informative and really powerful. So thank you so much.
Any other announcements or appreciations? It's my sister's always birthday on Friday, so wish her happy birthday.
Will do.
Well, I appreciate all the speakers. Most of them aren't here anymore, and I've already expressed my thanks to them, but it is, to learn from people, and especially people who are right here in our community, is really powerful. So we covered a lot of bases amongst us. Diane Agno says, "Many thanks to all who came tonight. We will carry the messages forward." Oh, sorry. Do you want to unmute? All right. Well, thanks, y'all.
Yep.
Steve, I'm going to stay on because I want to hear the end of your story.